Robert Mugabe, the Zimbabwean independence icon turned authoritarian leader, has died, aged 95, as reported by BBC some 7 hours ago. Mr. Mugabe had been receiving treatment in a hospital in Singapore since April 2019. He was ousted in a military coup in 2017 after 37 good years in power. The former president was praised for broadening access to health and education for the black majority, but later years were marked by violent repression of his political opponents and Zimbabwe's economic ruin. His successor, Mr Mnangagwa, expressed his utmost sadness, calling Mugabe, in quotes, an icon of liberation. Mr. Mnangagwa has been Mugabe's deputy before replacing him. Singapore's foreign ministry said he was working with the Zimbabwean embassy there to have Mr. Mugabe's body flown back to his home country. But yet, who was Mr. Robert Mugabe? He was born on the 21st of February 1924 in what was then known as Rhodesia, a British colony run by its white minority at that time. After criticizing the government of Rhodesia in 1964, he was imprisoned for more than a decade without trial. In 1973, while still in prison, he was chosen as president of the Zimbabwe African National Union, abbreviated ZANU, of which he was a founding member. Once released, he headed to Mozambique, from where he directed guerrilla raids into Rhodesia, but he was also seen as a skilled negotiator. Political agreements to end the crisis resulted in the new independent Republic of Zimbabwe. With his high profile in the independence movement, Mr. Mugabe secured an overwhelming victory in the Republic's first election in 1980. But over his decades in power, the international perceptions soared. Mr. Mugabe assumed the reputation of a strong man, leader, all-powerful, ruling by threat and violence, but with a strong base of support. An increasing number of critics labeled him a dictator. He died far from home, bitter, lonely, and humiliated, an epic life with the shabbiest of endings. Robert Mugabe embodied Africa's struggle against colonialism in all its fury and its failings. He wasn't a courageous politician, imprisoned for daring to defy white minority rule. The country he finally led to independence was one of the continent's most promising, and for years, Zimbabwe more or less flourished. But when the economy faltered, Mr. Mugabe lost his nerve. He implemented a catastrophic land reform program. Zimbabwe quickly slipped into hyperinflation, isolation, and political chaos. The security forces kept Mr. Mugabe and his party, ZANU-PF, in power, mostly through terror. But eventually, even the army turned against him and pushed him out. Few nations have ever been so bound, so shackled to one man. For decades, Mugabe was Zimbabwe, a ruthless, bitter, sometimes charming man who ruined the land he loved. In 2000, he seized land from white owners, and in 2008, he used violent militias to silence his political opponents during an election. He famously declared that only God could remove him from office. He was forced into sharing power in 2009 amid economic collapse, installing rival Morgan as prime minister. But in 2017, amid concerns that he was grooming his wife, Grace, as his successor, the army, his long-term ally, turned against the president and forced him to step down. What has the reaction been? Deputy Information Minister Energy Mutodi of Mugabe's ZANU-PF party told BBC the party was very much saddened by his death. In quotes, he's a man who believed himself. He's a man who believed in what he did, and he's a man who was very assertive in whatever he said. This was a good man, he said. Not everyone agreed, however. George Weldon, one of the British negotiators at the Lancaster House Agreement in 1979, which ended white minority rule, said Mr. Mugabe was a, in quotes, true monster. The agreement turned out rather well and looked good for a while, but Mr. Mugabe later became a grossly corrupt, vicious dictator, he said. Zimbabwean Senator David Quartet, once labeled, in quotes, an enemy of the state by Mr. Mugabe, said his legacy has been marked by his adherence to violence as a political tool. In quotes, he was always committed to violence, going all the way back to the 1960s. He was no Martin Luther King, he told BBC World Service. He never changed in that regard. But he acknowledged that there was another side of Robert Mugabe who had a great passion for education. There is a lot of affection towards him because we must never forget that he was the person primarily responsible for ending oppressive white minority. We end this report by saying farewell, Mr. Mugabe. But I'll leave you guys with a question. In your humble opinion, who is Africa's legend? Number 1, Nelson Mandela of South Africa. Number 2, Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe. Leave your answers and your personal opinions in the comment section below. It will be very much well appreciated. Until I come your way again, remain blessed. Over and out.